Thank you very much for joining us on the Voice of Job Seekers. This is Mark, your host. Thank you very much for joining us. And if you want to subscribe, look for the Voice of Job Seekers on iTunes. You can also go to thevoiceofjobseekers.com, press the send voicemail button. You can leave a message there if you'd like. You can also check out all the articles and posts that we have there to help you with your job search. And I wanted to thank you again and can't thank you enough. Marc Miller is back on the show to join me and to talk about his latest book that'll be out within a couple of days of this when we post here and when we publish. So want to welcome back Marc Miller. He is the founder of the very popular Career Pivot, and also an author and also a podcaster now. How are you, sir?
I'm doing fine. As always, it's great to be with you, Mark, even though your mama spells your name wrong.
Yeah, okay, all right. The saga continues. But as I've told Mark before, we catch up and then it's a half hour. So, oh yeah, we got to kind of record this, don't we? So definitely want to say congratulations on the podcast. First of all, Mark, great job. Great podcast. Love it. I'm a listener. I'm a subscriber and a supporter whenever I can.
Well, it's interesting. Being a podcaster has been a new journey.
Yeah.
And an interesting one. I look up to people like you who've been at this for a long time. I just recorded episode 21. I'm recording today, episode 21.
Oh, that's fantastic. And hopefully you'll keep it up. It is a great journey. I really enjoyed podcasting. I think it really did help my personal brand. It actually got me into places where I'd never thought I'd be. So you'll probably get there. And actually, you've been to places where I haven't been. So, it's only going to enhance yours even further. You can probably run for Pope here in the next year or so. But
I do say me run for president.
But, no, you got to be Pope. It's got to be better. I wouldn't put that curse on you, but that's a whole nother discussion. But anyway. I definitely want to talk to you about, first of all, the main thing is really talking about your latest book. And if you can give us the rundown, please, on your latest book and what you're after and what are your goals with your book.
Sure. This is Repurpose Your Career, a practical guide for the second half of life. This essentially is a follow-on to my first book, which was published in 2013, which was a Repurpose Your Career, a practical guide for baby boomers. Mm-hmm. And the one criticism I had of the first book was most of the stories, not most, all the stories of career change were mine. I'm on my 7th career. And so I now have 5 years of client stories I've added into the book. Mm-hmm. And then 2, I'm shifting down a little bit in age because I find I end up running into a lot of clients who are now not just baby boomers, but tend to be in their mid to late 40s mm-hmm. and possibly 50, who have been successful and hate what they do.
Yeah.
And so there's that shift. And then there's a lot of my own learning from the last 5 years. So I've got a chapter in the book on career failures, my 3 career failures and how I recovered from them and the formula behind that. Mm-hmm. And the other favorite chapter I have that everyone has said they love is the chapter on MSU syndrome. Make stuff up.
Yeah. And those are 2 probably my favorite chapters. And one of the things I think it kind of started with a blog post, if I remember correctly, about how failure is an option as opposed to the movie quote from Apollo 13. But you're saying that failure is an option. In fact, it's kind of a requirement.
Yeah, it's interesting. I was asked to speak at a virtual conference a couple of years ago about failures. And that's when I went back and looked at 3 of my career failures. And the common theme was, number one, I had a plan B.
Mm-hmm.
2, I knew what success was going to look like, and I knew how to measure it. And 3, if I decided to fail, I was going to fail fast, and I was going to pivot. And the failure is not an option syndrome, as those of us who grew up with Apollo 13,
Right.
was the fact is, well, you can't fail. If you fail, you're a screw up.
Yeah.
And we live in the world today where the barriers of entry to do stuff is minimal. I mean, look what we're doing right now. We're on a podcast.
Right.
We're talking over free software, Skype.
Right.
In fact, right now you're running this thing off your iPhone.
Yes, that's exactly right.
Right. The barrier. So the Silicon Valley philosophy of fail often, fail fast is a kind of a foreign concept to those of us in our 50s and 60s.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's, if you fail, you're a screw up.
Right.
And I'll use 2 examples. I had one woman, after I wrote the first set of blog posts, where she went off in 2007, a really bad time, and started a business and stuck with it and just wasn't going to give up. And finally she closed it down in 2011. But by the way, she had, I don't know, $25,000, $30,000, $40,000 in debt, and she was still going back to look for a job. And she'd been out of the market long enough that her skills were stale. And the fact is she wasn't, number one, willing to pivot while she was going through it and realizing this wasn't going to work. On the other hand, I have a good friend who's a Gen Xer who bought a staffing firm the end of 2007, a staffing franchise.
Mm-hmm.
Well, she shut it down the end of 2008. She realized she was not going to have the cash flow to make it through the Great Recession. And by the way, she came out actually pretty good because she's willing to say, this is not going to work. I'm going to go back and do something else. She learned some absolutely phenomenal skills that she's applying in her current job because she went and did it. She is happy that she did it, but you know what? The timing was horrible. And you've got to realize, you know what? Let's try something different. This is not going to work. And I've got a number of interviews on my podcast of people who've made late in life career changes. And the common theme was they had an idea and they didn't do anything about it. Then there was a second kick in the ass that suddenly said, you know what? It's time for me to do this. And 3, they were willing to change as things did not turn out the way they expected. But they were willing to move with the flow and not be so rigid. And some of them actually had made some fairly big changes as they went along. And in fact, I've got somebody I'm coming on my podcast next month he's on his second pivot.
Mm-hmm.
And by the way, he went from selling industrial equipment to driving trains for the Houston Metro Red Line to now being a drone pilot.
Interesting.
And he's picked up something at every stage and learned stuff and moved along. And those, it sounds like big, huge changes, but it really isn't. So, yeah, it all comes down to know thyself.
Yeah, there's a lot of self awareness that is involved, especially when you get older. You're supposed to be much more aware, but aware doesn't mean not making a mistake or not making a wrong turn. It's being willing to find out if you don't like it, you can go to the next step or do something entirely different.
Yeah, it's what one of the challenges, and you can probably relate to this, is many of us when we went into the corporate world, we changed our persona to match what our employer wanted us to look like.
Yeah. Yeah,
Right?
yeah. Or they
We
use a character, as I've heard someone say. Yeah, I become this character. It's not really me, but it's a character so that I can do what I'm asked because that's the only way I can do it. And there's a lot of people who feel that way.
Well, like we were talking before, you're an introvert. I'm a closet introvert. I'm a phenomenally good public speaker. I did that for 10 years for IBM. I'm really good at a networking event. I know how to work a room, work the conversation. And when I walk off the stage or I walk out of the room, I am
Mm-hmm.
tired. And when, as I always say, adrenaline is a great drug.
Yeah,
And when it wears off, I go thunk.
yeah,
And I've learned to behave like an extrovert, but that's not who I am. And that's a very sharp difference. And many of us go into the corporate world and we reshape ourselves. The problem comes is at some point in time, we can't keep it up. I'm 60 now, and I have people. I just got my letter from National Speakers Association. Why don't you sign up as a full-time member? And I'm going, nope. If I had to present 25 times a year on a, I'd be exhausted.
yeah.
I'm in my 60s now. I mean, for a 60-year-old, I'm in really good shape, but I don't have the stamina I had when I was in my 30s and 40s.
Sure, sure. But I think when people are afraid to try, because they think about how they're going to feel at the end, like you did. I mean, but people don't understand the value that's in the middle between where you started and where you're ended now. Most people look at, oh, I know I'll feel tired, so I won't. Yeah, going, well, you're going to feel tired anyway from whatever you do. But, is it a viable, I mean, are you willing to do that as part of the journey? And then you'll figure out how to recover or how to make a mistake. Or maybe if you don't want to feel that way, then just don't do it at all.
Well, it's learning how to moderate it.
Mm-hmm.
So you may realize you have these skills, and it's not that you're not going to do them, but it's learning how to moderate it. So I'll use one of my mantras is you have to know the difference between your talents and your skills.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Right.
And your talents are those things that you do innately. Skills are things that you learn.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a great quote from Larry Bird that I used in a blog post that basically I'll paraphrase it, is Larry said, a winner is someone who understands their God-given talents, works their butt off to develop skills based on those talents to be able to perform and be a winner. And if you remember, Larry Bird was not a great athlete. He's not.
Right.
He was slow. He could jump. I claim his talents were probably great eyesight and great hand dexterity,
Mm-hmm.
which he turned himself into a great shooter and passer. Now, the key thing you have to understand is burnout often occurs when we overuse skills that are not tied to our innate talents.
Yeah.
So just because you're good at something doesn't mean you should do it all the time. And this is why sometimes you'll hear people going, you know what? I don't want to do this anymore. And they'll get pushback from spouses and friends. Oh, but you're so good at it. Why would you want to give it up? You're paid so much money for it. Why would you want to stop? And the answer is, I don't want to do it anymore. I'm sick of it. And that's burnout. And and so it all comes down to is understanding the skills you've developed. Some of them, as you get into the second half of life, some of those skills you want to leave behind, or you want to moderate how much of those skills you use.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. But I think when people get lost, and I think one of the things I really appreciate about your book and you and knowing you personally, getting to know you personally now, is that you have a holistic approach. I think for a lot of people who want to kind of put personal branding in a package and sell it to other people, they can only look at it, in one way. Instead of looking at it as that when you're talking about personal branding, you're talking about the whole person. You're talking about the way you talk, the way you sound, the signature words that you use, all the way to how you're dressed and all the way to the things that you write, the things that you record, the things that are out there about you, to the way that people talk about you. And, it's sad when I see and read books that when people try to put personal branding in a package and try to sell to everybody. I think what you do is you said, this is my life and this is how it fits for me and this is how it could fit for you, using your whole life, not just in one little short package to give to someone and try to sell someone on it.
Yeah, it's one of the key aspects is I don't want to know what you do. I want to know who you
Mm-hmm.
are. I care. The reason I will care about you is because I know who you are. And that's a real difference. And a lot of us struggle with that.
Yeah.
So one of the methodologies I use is I use the Berkman assessment, but this can work with strength finders or any other of the assessments, is pulling up the strength phrases that you say, yes, that's me. Then I have you translate those phrases into, and like in your case, would call it Marc talk.
Right.
How do you say that? And then then once you have translated that, you now have a bulk of your own words to build your own dialogue. So when someone says, tell me about yourself, you can start self-describing yourself in your own words that fit that situation. And you won't use it all in every situation.
Mm-hmm.
But the idea is to give you a toolkit. And I want it to be authentic. Yeah, I had one client who we branded her as a project manager who makes her team the best that they can be. And she looked at me the one day and says, what if somebody doesn't like that? I said, then you don't want to work for them.
Yep.
Right?
Right.
Right? This is dating and marriage. Right. Right? Not every date turns into marriage.
Right.
Not every job interview, every job. Do you really want to work there? And if you authentically put your best foot forward, and again, the important word there is authentically put your best foot forward. Mm-hmm. Then they can judge, do we like this person? Unfortunately, a lot of times what we do is to do just like we did when we dated, and that's been almost 40 years for me, is we put a foot forward that's not necessarily authentic, and we just don't want to get rejected.
Right. But
we hate being rejected.
Right. But this brings up a point for a lot of baby boomers, or not even just baby boomers, people who are over 40, who say that, yes, but I need to, if I shorten the list of people that are interested in me, then I have less chances of getting a job. some of that I think is having faith in your abilities, and the others is that you're not going to be for everybody and everybody's flavor. You're going to want the people who really love you, want to work with you because of you, not because of who you think you should become. And I think that's where the lines get crossed between authenticity and someone who isn't authentic.
Yeah, you kind of discussed this on your recent podcast with Hannah Morgan. Is again looking yourself as a consultant.
Mm-hmm.
You solve problems for your employer. So what problems do you solve? Right? Get real clear, and then go look for employers that need those problems solved.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like recently I had a client, and we're trying to penetrate a large real estate organization that happened to be headquartered in Austin, Texas.
Mm-hmm.
You can figure that out. And she was meeting with a couple of the high level executives, and I said, you need to be asking really good probing questions. Hey, what's your strategy for this, or what's your strategy for that? And asking really good probing questions, because when they finally state, well, we're going in this direction, we have this problem, then you can position yourself properly.
Mm-hmm.
I like to say what you want to do is you want to poke at their underbelly.
Mm-hmm.
And, one of my favorite questions is, what keeps you up at night? Why are you creating this position, or what's your biggest challenge over the next year? And once you understand that, you say, okay, they have issues, and every organization has issues. Can I solve those? And if the answer is no, then you move on. So it's interesting. In my tech career, I eventually found that I was much better at working in really small, growing organizations than where I spent for 22 years working for IBM. Although even at IBM, I managed to be somewhat entrepreneurial. But if I was to go back into technology, I'd be looking for places where I could build stuff from scratch. And once it's built, I need to get the heck out.
Yeah. Yeah. And
need to move on.
Yeah. And I think people, I really think that when people start to understand, when you start to peel back the layers, you begin to have those moments of clarity. And those moments of clarity are the times when you should really start focusing even more on what is the value that you offer, and how succinctly can you offer that to an employer when asked, or to someone that you're networking with. And the more succinct you're able to wrap that up, the better your chances are of selling yourself without sounding like a salesman.
That's right. I've got a couple of clients right now where I have to tell them, when you walk into this meeting, you are not going to sell. You're going to ask really good questions. Mm-hmm. And when you ask really good questions, they're going to go, wow, you know your stuff.
And most of the best questions are not long and drawn out. They're targeted, and they're short, and they're short to the point, to where it almost demands a direct answer.
Well, the key thing is they all need to be open-ended.
Yeah.
Who, what, when, why, or how. And the more you can ask open-ended questions, you'll get people to tell you stuff that you will be surprised. I had a client who was interviewing. She was interviewing for a marketing position, fairly high level, and she ended up interviewing with the hiring manager's boss. And she asked her, so what keeps you up at night? And the woman just dumped with all the problems she was having in the organization. she just let it loose. And then when my client came back to me, I said, you go send an email back to the hiring manager. Says, I just had an interview with X and your boss, and she told me this. Here's why you should hire me. And she had all the ammunition.
Sure. It was the opportunity to tell you what solutions you bring and how it would apply to them. That's what you want. But a lot of people don't
get. But she only did that once she had the ammunition. She knew what the soft spots were.
Mm-hmm.
And I did a series last year before, based on Jim Camp's book called Starting with No. It's a negotiations book.
Mm-hmm.
And Camp in the book talks about the fact that you start from the very beginning. Negotiation doesn't start when you get a job offer. It starts at the first interaction.
Mm-hmm.
And it's asking all those good questions and doing it in a very scientific and precise way. And he has a whole set of systems, things like keeping your emotions in check. He calls it a blank slate.
Mm-hmm.
When someone finally in an interview says, oh, gosh, you're just a perfect candidate. And the answer is, keep calm. Do not let that go to your head. You don't have the job yet. To understanding, why do you want this job? Right? And don't seduce yourself. Because I've had a couple of clients who got, I like to say, the bright, shiny object.
Yeah.
They were told, oh, you're going to have a vice president title. You're going to manage 15 people. And the answer is, do you really want to manage people? And the answer is usually, no, but I like the vice president title. So why are you even pursuing this job?
Yeah, it's sort of like the lover that it promised you the world at first, when everything seems perfect, but the more you get to know, that could very well change your decision and the future of saying, well, I really don't like this after all. You told me way too much.
Well, I'll use the example. A lot of times when we get hired because of the boss. The boss is someone we really think we can work with. What happens if you walk into an organization where they have musical chair management? I've got a big, large technology company here in town, which has 4 letters and begins with D, where the managers move every 6 months.
Yeah.
It's part of the corporate culture. So would you take a job strictly because you really like the hiring manager? Well, that hiring manager is not going to be there guaranteed in a year. So, it's doing the homework and understanding what's really important to you. And then, it's the key piece here is, again, going back, what's really important to you? And one of the things I do with my clients is get them to go back to the best of times in their careers and the worst of times in their career and understand why. Why was that situation so good, and why did that situation suck?
Yeah.
Why did it suck the life out of you? Well, and by the way, we all had that. I started I got my first job as a programmer, I think, when I was 19 in 1976. So you can hopefully do the math. I've been working a long time. Right. And I know I can look back and I can say, okay, I get it now. And by the way, I've repeated some of the same mistakes twice.
And that just makes you more human. and because most of us want to admit it, we say, well, I never make the same mistake twice. And I'm going, well, you're lying, because most of us do. And if it's not in our career, we've done it in our romantic love lives. But somewhere you've made the same mistake not only twice, but more times than you could probably even count if you're real about it.
Well, one of the things is when you are unemployed and older, you will tend to gravitate back to things that are comfortable. They may not be good for you, but they will be comfortable. I'll use the example. I've left tech twice. I joke my second startup, I relapsed. I knew it was not a good thing, but it was comfortable. Similarly, I started my career at IBM writing word processor software, and I was sitting in an office with a coding pad for 8 hours a day. Gagged me. I hated it.
Yeah.
20 years later, I was at a crossroads at IBM, and I took a job in IBM Global Services as a consultant, where I sat in a cube for 8 hours a day writing technical specs.
Yeah.
Gagged me. I was horrible. And I realized it was in a time of where I didn't know where to go, and I gravitated back to something that was comfortable. And this is no different than the woman who has an abusive husband. She ends up divorcing him, ends up marrying another husband just like she left. Because it was familiar.
Yes.
And familiarity doesn't necessarily mean good.
No. They're great for pop songs, but not particularly for life or your career.
So I just got an email today from a guy I had been working with who got laid off from telecommunications company, director level, and got a bunch of family stuff going on, mother moving in, and he just, after a while, he just took a job with a consulting firm. It's not what he wants, but it's going to bring in a paycheck. And I told him, okay, number one, you're going to work your butt off for the next 6 months and put a calendar entry at 6 to 9 months to say, okay, where am I? In other words, look at this as a 1-year gig. Doesn't mean you're going to leave after a year, but I want you to do some serious evaluation. So if at 6 to 9 months you say, you know what, this isn't the right thing for me, then that's when you start your job search again. But you do it from a position of strength, being employed. So the 2 points I made to him is, number one, you don't control the timing. In other words, jobs open up when they open up, and you don't control that. 2, when you're unemployed, the next job isn't always the final landing place. Right? It's you need to get a paycheck back in.
Right.
He had a mortgage to pay. And okay, so he's going to take a job, and well, I can't, I'm supposed to be loyal. Screw loyalty. You're going to take the job, and by the way, do a really good job, but be ready to move on in a year.
There's something I want to ask you, and this is kind of and I think we talked a little bit about before offline, is your chapter on personal operating systems. And you use, and you mentioned before about the Berkman and how that is really effective for you and effective for your clients. But how deep, we hear all the talk all the time these days. If you are LinkedIn, people are talking about assessments that they take, whether it's StrengthsFinder 2.0 or it's Berkman or the MBTI. In your opinion, especially later on in life, maybe you could talk a little bit about their importance in figuring out part of that journey, and maybe a couple of the pros and cons, because I see where people say, well, this is my strength, I want to go here, and they think that that's going to be the magic antidote, but that doesn't account for how you feel about it emotionally, or what it will do to your life if you should go the route that the assessment should suggest.
Here's the problem with assessments. If all you do is take them, read them, and put them down, you know what? You probably wasted your money.
Right.
If you take them and really dig into them, which usually means getting some help. Now, it may be getting a help from a coach like me, or maybe it's getting help from your spouse. Or more importantly, for someone like you, Mark, is getting help from your sons.
Yeah.
Because they see you differently than your work people and your wife and for your friends do.
Mm-hmm.
And in fact, I've had some of my best brand stories written by adult daughters. Fascinating. But is go use them as a vehicle to reflect. And there are two things I use the Berkman for that I really like, because the Berkman will tell you how you behave, which, by the way, which is what DISC and Myers-Briggs will tell you how you behave. But then in that same behavior, how do you want to be treated? And that's where you end up with these gaps. My class example I talked before was I'm a closet introvert, right? I'm not an extrovert, although I appear to be. I can't tell you the number of folks I've worked with who are closet creatives. And getting back, in other words, they're highly creative and they take it and shoved it. Is getting back. And then the other piece is understanding. The Berkman has something called behavioral patterns report, where it will show you your odd combinations of behaviors. So I'll use the example. I've worked with an executive who, former big 3 consulting house, very driven, really smart, MBA, and oh, by the way, he is a kind, compassionate soul. Big driven consultants are not kind, compassionate souls.
They're less than.
and so therefore, one of the key aspects was he really has to, his management chain has to be kind and compassionate. And one of the things we looked back in his career, and he had done best when he had female-dominated management chains. I had a gentleman who was we branded him a cause-driven, people-oriented geek. That's an oxymoron. But those odd combinations is what make you special. And once you can start pulling those out, and the problem is when we are odd, or as I like to say, I'm special, is that's what makes you different. And very often, those of us who are in the second half of life, being different isn't viewed as being good. And as you know, I'm special.
Yeah.
And that's good.
And it's not a bad thing to be different, but you don't have to use the word different, because I think people, depending what area you grew up, different means different things.
I live in Austin, Texas, where the city motto is "Keep Austin Weird."
Yeah. Yeah. That says everything that you need to know. Or you could take it as a caution sign.
But these assessments are nothing more than tools to get you to go back and use them. Like I talked earlier about using the strength phrases and translating them. Looking at some of the more advanced reports and finding out, wow, do I have, use example of Strengths Finders, do I have some congruent or opposing strengths? And, am I, like I had one client, I labeled him a logical creative, right? Very, very sequential, logical, and incredibly creative. Well, that's an odd combination. By the way, you're looking for somebody who wants that.
Right.
And those are the kinds of things, if you'll use the assessments as tools to dig deeper. And usually one of the biggest challenges is you probably need to get someone else's help, because i.e. you need to get out of your own head. Because none of us see ourselves the way other people see us.
Right. And it goes back to, I think a lot of us grew up with the idea that as much as we like to be, we're not the most objective about ourselves. So, in fact, we can be even the most detriment of ourselves if we rely on our own view of ourselves. And we're not taking in consideration, at least, what other people view of us. And that's the problem when people brand themselves. They always put what they want to be instead of just trying to concentrate on the value that they actually offer others and what other people remember.
Yeah, it's interesting. When I got my Berkman, and the first thing when I did it, when Barry, my mentor, gave me my feedback, I told him, "You've been talking to my wife. Nobody knows this stuff."
Mm-hmm.
But one of the key aspects is I found the number of areas where I had seduced myself. Use the example, I appear very unstructured. I can walk into chaos and I can create order. And my motto for myself for many years has been, I'm at my best when I don't know what I'm doing.
Mm-hmm.
The challenge is I actually need a little more structure than I think, actually a good bit more structure than I think.
Mm-hmm.
And I can now look back and say, wow, I've dug myself some holes where I've gotten into situations where I got in over my head. And because I believed I didn't need any help. Well, the reality was I needed to get help really early on. I didn't need a massive amount of help.
Mm-hmm.
But for example, when I started Career Pivot, I am purposely hired a top flight coach's coach at the very beginning.
Mm-hmm.
And I did that purposely because, wow, I could just go wing this, which is what I've done a lot of times. And I'm good at it, but I've dug myself some big holes. And so the assessments, if you just let them stand alone, but if you use them as part of your toolkit, they can be very valuable.
Those are excellent suggestions. Anything that we should be ready to take away from your book that you hope that would resonate to the readers?
Yeah, I think the key piece here is you've got to figure out, number one, who you are, and two, this is an incremental process. We don't make big, huge leaps. We make pivots.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, I'm because of this thought process, I'm going to be writing a blog post, and the fact that career pivot doesn't mean career change.
Great
right?
point. Yes.
Career pivot. I've had any number of clients who have been pivoting along their way, getting closer and closer to what they want. And sometimes one pivot is enough. Sometimes it's two, sometimes it's three, but sometimes it's switching industries. Sometimes it's switching jobs within the same industry. Sometimes it's making multiple steps to get to where you want to be. But, we all are going to have to pivot because stuff is changing too damn fast.
Right. It is. Yeah.
Right? I mean, we're going to see, well, I'll use the example of the fight for 15. And by the way, I'm a big believer that we need to raise the minimum wage.
Yes.
But one of the things that's going to cause is technology to come in. So, for example, don't be surprised you're going to you're going to go up to a Hardee's or wherever your fast food place is, and you're going to order your burger on your smartphone. or what's happened in the oil industry. I live in Texas. When oil prices collapsed 2 years ago, the number of active oil rigs was cut by about 50, 60%. And so, therefore, a lot of jobs went away. By the way, we have as many active rigs working today in Texas that we had 3 years ago with no more jobs. In other words, the jobs haven't come back because the oil industry had gotten fat. They were doing a lot of things manually. When oil was $100 a barrel, they were making a lot of money, and they didn't have to be efficient. Now that I guess oil is back to $50 a barrel, where they can now, using technology, they can be profitable at $50 a barrel, which they couldn't do 2 years ago. Right? So will jobs be eliminated by technology? The answer is heck yes. Will it affect your job? Probably. I wrote a blog post a couple of years ago called "Has Your Job Been Smacked?" And SMAC stands for Social, Mobile, Analytics, or Cloud. And if you think you're immune to any of that, you and I know, you must be smoking something.
Yeah. I mean,
but you don't.
Right. I mean, we understand jobs that have repetition added to it are likely to be the first ones to be automated. But that doesn't mean that there are even surgeries that doctors perform can also be done by robots and to some degree automated, especially when it's the same procedures over and over again. The only thing that's going to be missing is the actual human touch during the process. And that's going to cause things to look a lot differently in the next 5 to 10 years than it does now.
Okay, you probably we just finished the first weekend of March Madness. Right. Okay, half to 2/3 of the articles on the games were written by computer on ESPN. In other words, journalism is being, on certain aspects, is being taken over by computers. And if you said that 5 years ago, you would have said, what? Because all they're reporting on is certain, scores, number of rebounds, a lot of quantifiable that someone can plug in some data and it can spit out the article.
Yeah. Which means you'll have to be ready to make several pivots.
That's right.
You'll make many different types of pivots even. And we're not even talking in official career changes. You're saying it's not necessarily that, but for every skill or the way that it changes the dynamics of your work or your career trajectory is going to be considered a pivot, and it's going to be critical for you to make in order for you to keep up with the economy and the industry as it continues to morph, even sometimes on a daily, weekly basis.
Let's take the example of journalists, right? A lot of journalists have been displaced, but I'll use the example of the copy editor on my book. Used to work for my local paper. She's making decent money. My co-author on my book, Susan Leahy, she's a former journalist. She now ghostwrites books. She reports for Silicon Hills, a website. She does a variety of things that you wouldn't have believed of 10 years ago. And she's kind of taken her profession, which used to bring in a paycheck, and turned it into a freelance that she's figured out how to make it work.
Yeah.
And it's just different. I mean, I get, for example, on my Career Pivot blog, I get probably 15 requests a week from people who want to write for me for free. I accept 2 a month. And by the way, some of this stuff is really good. 2 of my top 10 posts in 2016 were written by young kids who wanted to write for me, and I'm very picky, but it's good stuff, and they're out there building their portfolio. Well, as boomers, we need those of us in the second half of life. We have to do the same thing.
Yeah,
and we may not get paid for it initially.
Truly. So, to wrap it all up here, as we are approaching the hour mark here, Repurpose Your Career, Practical Guide for the Second Half of Life. Right now, well, as when this is published, this is going to be published the same week that your book comes out, April 15th, 2017.
Yeah, we're gonna. I'm vastly. I may move it to the 17th or 18th, but middle of April. It's available. It will be available for pre-order until that time, and yeah, because I'm thinking of moving it from a Friday to a Monday.
Okay.
But
okay,
I wanted to honor IRS Day.
Right.
But IRS,
right.
Your tax returns are not officially required until April 18th. This year.
Right. So, so you'll want to go to Amazon, or you can go to careerpivot.com to also find out how you can get a copy if you want to go through there as well. Want to congratulate you again on some fine work, a book that I
thank you.
Continue to read. And we'll be reading amongst all the other ones. See, you get all the blog posts. I have people want to come on the show and talk about their books, and it doesn't stop. So they know they know I'm a book nut, but there are limitations to how many books I can actually get to and give a good review on. And I think too, I gave you a review on your book, and I think it's going to be included in your book. Is that right?
Yes, it's going to be inside the front cover.
Inside the front cover. I've arrived.
Well, I have quotes from Chris Farrell, who wrote Unretirement. I have Richard Eisenberg, who's managing editor from Next Avenue. Carrie Hannon, who is Miss Forbes and AARP, and Nancy Collamer, who again writes for Forbes and Next Avenue. And those are on the front and back cover.
Wow. I'm in some elite company. You sure I belong on the front?
Oh.
You sure you got the right guy? But that's really an honor. I really appreciate that. It was an honor to get a preview of it as well. But for the rest of you, thank you very much for listening to the podcast. Join us again next week. I will be taking a break in May for a couple of weeks. I'll let you know exactly what the dates are coming up. But it's not that I don't want to give you material. I need a break. And you guys know that if you've been following me for a while, I do take one about this time, as well as I'll be taking my my summer break starting about the middle of July this year up until September. So I want to be prepared for that, but that doesn't mean I won't be writing. So I just want to let you know that I will continue to do that, and you'll be able to find me into some great spots, hopefully, and as usual. In the meantime, you guys have a great week. We'll see you next time.